You know those moments in movies, the ones that are just burned into your brain, the scenes that define a character, that completely shock you or make you fall in love with the story. What's wild is that some of the most famous ones were almost never seen at all. They were argued over, they were dismissed, and they came this close to ending up on the cutting room floor. So let's get into the incredible stories of cinema's greatest survivors.
I mean, seriously, just try to imagine it. The Shining, but without Jack Nicholson smashing through the door with an axe and shouting that terrifying line. It's impossible to picture, right? But that moment came incredibly close to being cut. And this is the kind of razor's edge creative decision that happens behind the scenes all the time.
So, we're going to break this all down into 3 big reasons why these amazing scenes almost got the chop. First, we'll look at scenes cut because they were just too intense emotionally. Then, we'll get into the practical nightmares, budget and tech issues. And finally, the storyteller's dilemma, what actually serves the plot best.
All right, first up, walking the emotional tightrope. This is where filmmakers start to worry that a scene is just, well, too much. Too shocking, maybe too cheesy, or just way too intense for an audience to handle.
Let's start with a moment that literally changed horror forever. We're talking about Ridley Scott's Alien, and one of the most physically shocking and unforgettable scenes ever filmed.
The studio was absolutely terrified. They thought the scene was so gruesome that people would literally get up and run out of the theater. They pushed hard to have it shortened, tone it down. But the director, Ridley Scott, he knew this scene was the movie. It was the terrifying heart of it all. He fought for it, and what we got is a masterclass in horror that didn't just define the film, it basically gave a whole generation of filmmakers permission to push the boundaries.
But, it's not just fear that gets scenes on the chopping block. Sometimes it's the total opposite. James Cameron, the director of Titanic, he looked at that iconic I'm flying scene with Jack and Rose, and he thought it might be too cheesy. He almost cut it himself because he was worried it was just overly sentimental. Thankfully, he left it in, and in the process, created one of the most enduring images in movie romance history.
And that brings us right back to this, a line that wasn't even supposed to be in the movie.
Get this! That line was a total ad-lib by Jack Nicholson. It was a reference to the old Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. The director, Stanley Kubrick, was an American, and he had no idea what it meant. So a real debate started. Was it too funny? Did it break the tone of this terrifying movie? In the end, they kept it, and it became absolutely legendary.
And believe me, this is not a new thing. All the way back in 1933, the original King Kong had this scene where sailors get eaten alive by giant spiders. Well, the first test audiences were so horrified that the filmmakers literally went back to the physical film prints and cut the scene out. That footage is now lost forever, a classic case of an audience's reaction directly changing a movie.
Okay, but it's not always about feelings. Sometimes a scene's biggest enemy is just cold, hard cash and logistical headaches. These are the practical nightmares that threaten even the most brilliant ideas on paper.
Just look at Jurassic Park. The crew built this revolutionary, life-size T-Rex animatronic. On set, though, it was a total disaster. It would short-circuit in the rain, it was constantly breaking down, and the production was falling behind schedule and going way over budget. It got so bad that producers seriously talked about cutting some of the T-Rex's biggest scenes just to get the movie finished.
I mean, can you even imagine Raiders of the Lost Ark without that opening? The temple, the traps, the giant rolling boulder. It is one of the greatest character introductions of all time. But it was also incredibly expensive, and the studio almost scrapped the entire thing to save money before a single frame was even shot.
And it's a similar story with the climax of Back to the Future. The lightning striking the clock tower at that exact perfect second. That was a logistical nightmare to film. It was so complicated and so expensive that the filmmakers actually debated swapping it for a much, much simpler ending. Thank goodness they stuck to their guns and gave us that unforgettable finale.
Okay, our final section here deals with the story itself. This is where scenes are debated not because they're too scary or too expensive, but because of how they affect the narrative. Does this scene slow things down too much? Is it really, truly necessary for the plot?
A perfect example is the original Star Wars. There was this great scene where Luke reunites with his old friend Biggs Darklighter right before the final battle. George Lucas cut it from the 1977 version because he felt it slowed down the pacing. But then, 20 years later, he put it back in for the special edition because he decided it was actually crucial for understanding Luke's journey. And sometimes the debate is about staying true to the book. In The Two Towers, Aragorn's fall from the cliff, that's not in Tolkien's book. The filmmakers argued about it intensely.
Was this fake-out death just a cheap trick, or was it a necessary moment to really raise the stakes for the characters? They ultimately kept it in to ramp up the dramatic tension.
So what about this moment from Harry Potter? The heroes are at their lowest point, and in the middle of all that darkness, Harry and Hermione share this quiet, tender dance. Was this a beautiful, essential moment of connection, or was it a pointless detour that just stalled the plot?
Well, the filmmakers decided it was absolutely essential. Their argument was that in a story that's so driven by action and plot, they needed this quiet beat to ground the characters, to remind us of their deep friendship and their shared humanity. They chose emotion over pure narrative speed.
So, as we've seen, it really boils down to three key pressures that are always at play. There's the fear of how an audience will react emotionally, there are the very real-world limits of budgets and technology, and there's that constant struggle to tell the best, tightest story possible.
The next time you're watching a movie and you see one of those unforgettable scenes, just remember, it's almost never an accident. It's a survivor. It's the product of a fight, a passionate debate, and a deep-seated belief that this specific moment absolutely had to be seen.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? As you're watching movies today, what moments you're being fought for right now behind the scenes, and what incredible scene, cut from a film we'll see this year, might we only discover 20 years from now and think, how on earth did we ever live without that?